are there any like, questions or issues or stresses straight off the bat? Is there anything that anyone wants to bring up before we start? No? I'm going to take that to mean that you're all doing really fine and that everything is going really well, or that you haven't got your first essay back yet, so you don't really know what's going on. Probably now it seems like people are starting to get their essay questions and prompts are starting to, come on quite thick and fast. So please, as I've said before, if you need any help, feel free to message me and we can organise some kind of meeting to go through your essay. Any other business? No. Okay. Did anyone get a chance to look at the note-taking handout that a couple of people? Okay. So if you want to give me some feedback on that, that's fine. If otherwise, we'll press on and do active reading today. Okay, great. So what I will ask you guys to do is to go into the file that says Seminar 2 Active Reading. So this is one of the files that I put in the file section under Hub's writing seminar. Has everybody got that up? Yeah, sort of. This is really, really hard because usually with these classes, it's a chance to kind of see, how people are going and see who's kind of really nervous and who's feeling comfortable. But because I can only see a few people's faces, it's really hard to gauge if you guys are understanding. Or the other thing is, somebody mentioned, I think Trung, you mentioned that I speak very fast. So please, if I'm speaking too fast, when I get excited, I speak very, very fast, and then, and also I have an Australian accent, and it's very hard to understand. So please, 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 if I'm speaking too fast, please, you can put your hand up or interrupt me. Don't feel like you're being rude, please, because I know I have this issue. I should speak slowly. Okay, so what we have, what you should have in front of you is a little cartoon of a school teacher and a little boy. Is that what you guys have got? Great. And the school teacher is said, it's called reading. It's how people install new software in their brains. Ha, 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 ha. So basically, what do we mean by active reading? So the first section, if you go down to the next page, it should be a little brain that looks like they're doing exercise. And it says active reading preliminaries. So what do we mean by active reading? What are we supposed to be doing? Basically, the reading that you are supposed to be doing is not like reading a novel. It's not like watching TV. It's not just kind of doing something for enjoyment. It's not just kind of letting the information flow over you. You have to make some effort on your part to engage with the text. And what do I mean by engage with the text? I mean, not just understand the arguments, although that's very important, but also be able to critique the arguments, analyze the arguments, reflect on the arguments, decide. So what does all this mean? It means, for example, thinking about whether you find the arguments convincing or not. It means making comparisons between what this author says and what other authors say. It means reflecting on whether what the author says resonates with you. Does that make sense in your life, for example? It means thinking about how different contexts might change the truth of what the author says, right? It's about thinking about the purpose that the author wrote, and how that relates to the content. So these are some of the things that you want to be thinking about. These are some of the things that you want to be reflecting on. And we'll go deeper into this section, this kind of part, which is the more reflective part. We'll go deeper into this at the end of this class. But for now, I just want you to get a general idea that you're not just reading for fun. So active reading is a buzz phrase, which means thinking about what you are reading and why, while you are reading. To read effectively, you should put in some effort, engage with the text, and reflect on it as you read. It's not like watching TV. The information is not just passively fed to you. It is like digging for gold. Find the nuggets and be a winner. As you get more practice, you will find out what techniques work for you. But it is sometimes hard to get started. Here are some simple and easy step-by-step. Here is sorry, my grammar is, that would have made my grammar wrong. Here is a simple step-by-step approach you can use to reading a text. Okay, so note that when you're reading these texts, and what I'm talking specifically about is the text that you get in the philosophy subjects, yeah? And the history subjects also. There's an assumption that you're, especially when you're starting out, if you read a text once, it's not going to be enough. If you get an article and you read it once and you're like, oh, okay, I understand that article, it's about Madhyamika. I mean, that's great, but that's not enough. That's not the level of depth of understanding that they require for you in the BA, and even more in the MA, for anyone that's going into that, yeah? So you're looking at reading a text maybe 3 times. When I was doing my first undergrad, and I've done quite a few undergrads now, and a couple of masters, when I was doing my first one, I would read a text maybe 10 times. So anything like less than 10 times, you're still reading it like, you know, that's within the realm of possibility, right? And it depends on the text. Some texts are much easier because they're like not really dense. Some of those tricky philosophical texts, like if you're reading like hardcore Madhyamika theory, and especially if it's in translation, you know, if you're reading a translation of a Sanskrit text or a Tibetan text, some of that stuff is so dense. It's so dense. So one sentence could have so much meaning that you have to unpack. And sometimes you have to read the sentence. I don't know if this happened to you, but like, do you ever read a sentence, or you read like a whole paragraph, or you read a whole page, and then you're like, I have no idea what was going on there. I have no idea. And then you have to go back and read it again. It's really frustrating, but this is not unusual. This is like completely normal and what you should be doing. So you get to the end and you're like, oh, I have no idea what's going on. Okay, start again and do it again. Don't think, oh, I've read that page, you know, I don't want to go back, you know, it's embarrassing to go, but, you know, I should be able to do this first time, because it doesn't work like that for anybody, even, you know, people doing their doctorates and beyond, yeah. Okay, so you may have to read the text several times. Okay, so basically, has anybody done, I think, Julia, you've probably done this quite a lot before, because you mentioned you've done some humanities subjects before.
Yes, but it was 10 years ago, so.
Okay, so you might be a bit rusty, no, it happens, yeah? But you do have, like, you know, sort of, you have maybe an intuition or a feeling for this kind of reading, yeah? Great. I'm guessing that probably most of the rest of you guys maybe haven't done this before, or at least haven't done it at a kind of tertiary education level. Many people come to me and say, look, I just don't even know where to start. They give me like these texts, and it's all kind of all over the place, and I don't know what they want me to know. I don't know what the teachers expect me to get from the text. Am I supposed to memorize all the text? Am I supposed to understand everything about the text? So what I've actually made here is like a kind of step-by-step like process of how you can approach it. You don't have to use this, but I feel like if you feel overwhelmed and if you think, I don't even know where to begin, then this is a nice way to kind of like a checklist of things to go through to kind of ask yourself. Yeah. Okay. And not all these points will be like applicable to all the texts that you read. Okay, great. So we've got three categories. We've got the preliminaries, identifying the arguments, and the critical engagement. So let's start with number one. Am I speaking too fast, or are you guys following? Okay. Oh, a little bit slower, you think, Lily? Okay. All right. Yes. Received. Okay. So, step-by-step guide to active reading. Part 1, preliminaries. So we're on 3A for your reference. So for the preliminaries, I've got clarify your purpose for reading, and we will go through these steps, yeah? So maybe we'll just skip straight to the next page where we go through each of the steps. So if you go to 3B, which is the preliminary steps. So what's the first thing you do when you approach a text? Where do you start? So I would suggest that the place you start is by asking yourself, what is my purpose for reading this text? Why am I reading this text? So active reading is always reading with a particular purpose. Your purpose for reading, besides the purpose of passing the class and also to avoid the teacher's reprimand, could be, for example, to find out more information about a particular topic. For example, if the topic in your class is Yogacara, then you might be reading to establish a general understanding of what Yogacara is and how it relates to Madhyamaka and the other schools. So that's probably what you're going to be doing most of the time. In the case where the teacher is giving you texts in the first year, a lot of this is going to be just to get a general sense of the topics, right? To understand what the difference is between Madhyamaka and Yogacara, for example. Yeah? There's like a general information. If you're doing your own research, it might be to find arguments to justify your own thesis. So this would be the case when you're writing your own essay and you have to do research for that essay. You have to go searching for particular arguments or for particular ideas that support your arguments. So, for example, if my thesis is that I don't know, the origins of Madhyamaka thought began in the 4th century BCE. That was my claim, that was my thesis, then this second point would be looking for evidence for that and looking for other people that make arguments to that effect. Yeah. So this will come, I mean, that will be more applicable when you start to do research papers, which you will be doing soon, I think. If you're reading for the purpose of research, you might already have a well-formulated argument against which to compare other ideas. You can use these sources either to justify or challenge your thesis claims. So, for example, let's say I'm writing a paper and my thesis, because remember, I mean, I don't know if you know, every paper should have, every essay, formal essay should have a thesis. My thesis is that the origins of Madhyamaka come from the 4th century BCE, India, right? Now, usually that would not be the case. Like generally and historically speaking, you know, Madhyamaka came a lot later than that. It came with like Nagarjuna, and nobody really knows when he was around, maybe 1st century, maybe not, we don't know yet. But usually they would say that's the origin. So how do I want to prove that it came from the 4th century BCE, the 4th century before the Common Era, yeah? Probably I would want to say, okay, but the tradition says that the origins of it came from, you know, Gautama Buddha. So that's how I would want to kind of prove that. So if I was going to argue this, I would be looking for several different things. So I'd be like scrolling through texts and through books to try and find things that support my thesis. So I'd be looking for other theorists that agree with me, right? And then I have other people that I can use to justify my thesis. I would also be looking for pieces of evidence that support my thesis. So maybe I could find, some text from, the Buddha's time, which mentions Madhyamaka or something like this. But I'm also looking for counter arguments. So I'm looking for people that disagree with me and things that contradict my thesis. So when you're doing active reading, you're not just looking for things that support your own ideas. You're also looking for anything that contradicts your own ideas. Because then you can think about, okay, well, how would I respond to that? How could I, if there is an opponent's argument, how can I react to that? How can I take their argument and show that they're wrong and that I'm right? So, but we're still looking at preliminaries here, so I don't want to go, I've already gone quite deep. I don't want to go so deep. Okay, so other reasons you might be reading is to find out what a particular author's opinion is about an issue. This is very important. Each academic will have their own point of view on an issue. Knowing generally what an author claims is even more important than remembering facts. Okay, so you're looking for the specific author's view. And I would suggest that in most of your classes now, when you're doing these readings, identifying the author's thesis and the author's view is even more important than identifying the facts. Because most of the texts that you're given will be argument driven. Do you know what I mean by argument driven? It means that it's not just like a textbook. It's not just like giving you information. So for example, for you guys in the history class, if you're reading Bronkhorst's article, he's not just explaining about what things were like in the time, of the Buddha. When he does explain what things were like in the time of the Buddha, he's doing it not just like to educate the public, not just kind of out of some sort of sense of like, explaining what's what, but he's doing it in order to prove his thesis. Right, okay. This will all come up again. Maybe I'm going in a little bit too deep. You can also use this to look for, you can use the readings to look for facts that you might need to know in exams, but this is not maybe so important. Okay. So names and dates and simplified definitions are often useful in exams, especially in the first year. Like those of you studying history, there will be like exams, and also people doing the studying Bodhicharyavatara, there will be exams. So when you're reading those texts, you might also be, looking for, okay, what are the 3 types of suffering? That sounds important. Maybe I should remember that. Yeah. So, but be wary of these facts. Usually a single source is not enough to take something as true. So just because you read it in one of the texts, don't necessarily accept that it is the case. Right. You can verify your facts against other sources or attribute them to the author who claims them. Okay. Is that clear so far? The final reason that you might be doing this reading is to learn new techniques from the author. So when you're reading, keep in mind that you're not just learning the content, and you're not just learning the author's arguments and what the author's view is, but you're also learning how to write. So the more you read these texts, even if you read them and you don't really understand what the authors are saying, the more you read them, the more your own writing will improve. If you read something and you think, oh, that's a really nice way of phrasing it, then like note that down. You don't want to use that exact same phrasing, because then that would be like, copying from the author. But you know, note when they use like really interesting stylistic, you know, or new words that you don't know, stuff like that is important to note down. I'm just going to charge my computer. Sorry. It seems to be. Right. So this is just me talking, and I don't really like doing this, but are there any questions so far? Basically, the first thing you do is you think, okay, what do I want to get from this text? I've given you a lot of information. Maybe don't worry about the information I've given you. Just remember, you sit down and you think, okay, what do I want to know? And most of the time, what you want to know is the author's thesis and the author's arguments. So, to that end, identify the title, the author. This is step 2. Identify the title, the author, the source, and the structure of the text. So, what is it called? If you can't answer that, then you're in big trouble, yeah? What's the name of the text? Who wrote it? If you don't know who the author is, then please look them up, like Google them or, you know, look them up on Wikipedia. When did they write it? When was it published? Because they're not always the same. Where did they write it? Where was it published? So the reason you are asking these questions is because by just looking at the kind of the author, the title, and the context of writing, you can already make some assumptions about what the text is going to be about. You can sort of make some educated guesses that about the style of the text, about what the content is going to be. I mean, if an essay is called, I don't know, the Buddha was born in Nepal, what's that going to be about? It's obviously going to be about, anybody? If you read a text called The Buddha was born in Nepal? Okay, I'm just going to assume you all know. You can work that out, yeah? It's going to be about whether the Buddha was born in Nepal, of course. So, like, I know it sounds really obvious and really kind of stupid, but if you don't sort of, if you want to get like a general idea of what this is going to be about, you have to make these sort of assumptions at the beginning, and you might be wrong. Oftentimes you'll read like the text name, and then you'll read the article and you'll be like, I have no idea why he would have called that, or why she would have called it by that name, because it's completely not connected. But then that's also an interesting thing to remember. I mean, that's also like creates new ideas for reflection. Yeah, why did she? You know, why is there such a gap between the literal meaning of the name and what the text says? Right. Okay. So what about the author? If the author is, say, who's studying Bodhicharyavatara? A couple of people. Okay. So if the author, okay. If the author is Shantideva, what are we going to assume about the style of the text? Are there any assumptions we could make?
Poetic. Poetic.
Exactly. Excellent. It will probably be poetry, right? Any other assumptions we can make? What about the content? What assumption can we make about the content?
Practical.
Practical, right? It's practical. He's writing for Buddhists, right? He's writing for Buddhists. He's writing to give people a Buddhist path. It's not going to be just, I mean, if there is theory, it's going to be theory which is directed towards practice, yeah? Anything else?
Will be in the Mahayana context?
It will be in Mahayana text, absolutely. Now, what if we were reading a text by, I don't know, Gethin? Have you guys come across Gethin? Or one of the other academics, yeah? I'm trying to think of stuff that you might have done in the history class. I don't know. What about like Gombrich or something? I think you guys have. Give me a name of an academic that you guys have read something
Lopez.
about. Lopez, great. Lopez is a great one. Okay.
Gethin.
Okay, so we've got three. Let's say we've got three. We've got Shantideva, we've got Lopez, and we've got Gethin. How is first of all, how is Lopez going to be different from Shantideva? Well, one is going to be writing from a purely Buddhist perspective. And one is going to be, although I think Lopez, did have a strong background in Buddhism. I think he is a Buddhist from recollection, but he's not going to be writing, poetry, as who was it, Carlson, I think, mentioned. He's going to be writing like social history, something like this. And he's not going to be assuming that his readers are 9th century monks, whereas Shantideva is going to be assuming that, because that was, his intended audience. Lopez's intended audience is like Buddhist studies academics, yeah, and people doing sort of social history and things like that, yeah. And then Gethin, he's mainly doing like history, although he does quite a lot of philology as well, yeah. But is Gethin going to be giving you a practical path to enlightenment? No, probably not. Probably not. So we already know, even just from the few names, yeah. And even though we're just starting, most of you, maybe some of you have like a strong background in Buddhist studies, but I'm guessing that most of you are just kind of starting with this, yeah. There's a few names, and we already can make assumptions about what the texts are going to be about based on who the authors are, yeah? Right. If, for example, let's say Shantideva said that anyway, we can come back to this. We can come back to that.
There is no greater virtue than patience.
Right. Okay. Excellent. That's lovely. I was going to pick something more controversial about what he said, but that's lovely. There is no greater virtue than patience. I'm guessing you wouldn't be surprised if you read that from Shantideva. If you read that from Lopez, that would be quite surprising, yeah? And you would probably try and find some other meaning. Probably would think maybe his meaning is not literal, right? So just as a side note, when Shantideva makes a claim like that, there is no other virtue than, what was it? What was the quote again?
Patience.
Patience, great. There's no other virtue than patience. He's allowed to make claims like that. You guys are not in your own essays. So please, 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 when you're writing your own essays, don't make claims which will isolate everyone who's not Buddhist, everyone who doesn't agree. So instead of saying there is no other virtue than patience, you can say, according to Shantideva, there is no other virtue than patience. According to the Buddhist view, it's better to be as specific as possible, but you can say, according to the Buddhist view, the 4 noble truths are necessary for enlightenment, yeah? Okay. That's just a note about your own writing, because that often comes up in essays again and again and again, especially because people are sitting in the Kempo classes and they're listening to the Kempo talk, and the Kempo is saying, this is how it is, this is how it is, this is how it is, this is the truth, this is the way, this is the path, this is how you do it, da 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 da. And then so when people come to write their reflection papers for the Kempo classes, they will often say, it is a fact that there is no other virtue than patience, and that doesn't work for the reflection papers. Right. Okay. Okay, so you can also ask yourself other questions like, is the text long or short? Are there headings, captions, or some unusual formatting? Is it an article? Is it a book is an extract. So they're also going to give us clues about what the text is about just by looking at, oh my gosh, we've almost run out of time. Okay, all right, this is fine. Okay, so basically what you're asking is look at these kind of external details of the text that you can find at first glance, and then think about what kind of guesses you can make about the text from that information. Okay. Step 3, skim the text. So the next thing to do once you've kind of got a basic, once you've made some guesses about the content, is to quickly read over the text. If you get to the end and you don't really understand exactly what's, you know, what all the details, that's fine. But what you're reading for is to just have a general understanding of the subject matter of the text, and if you can kind of find out the author's thesis, that is excellent. So some tricks, I've listed some tricks here. If you read the first and the last pages, this can often help you prepare, yeah? Because often in the first page and the last page, you're going to get some kind of summary. And you're often in the first page, you'll find the author's thesis as well, if there is one. Skim the rest of the text. Read the first and last sentence of each paragraph. This is a really good one if you've got to read like long books. Like sometimes you'll be given like whole books to read, and they'll be like, okay, read this and write a summary, write, you know, a reflection on it. And you're like, oh my gosh, I've got like 3 days to read a book like this. So one thing you can do there is if you read the first and the last sentence of each paragraph, and that's going to at least give you some kind of idea of what's going on in the text. Ignore the long quotes and examples. And you can also, this is something I like to do, is I get the computer, like I click on it and I get the computer to read it out to me, because then I can just like listen to it and sort of do kind of more of a passive, you know, reading, which is fine for the first read, yeah. Okay. Skimming means reading the text quickly to get an overview of its content and the general thrust of the argument. Scanning means running your eyes over the page to find a particular keyword or phrase. Great. Okay. So the next thing to do is identify the subject matter. What is the topic of the text? And you can usually work this out pretty quickly. I'm going to leave that. Oh no, actually this is maybe important. You might think also about who the author is and where the text was published for clues about the subject matter. For example, an article published in the Journal of Indian Philosophy is probably not going to be about knitting techniques used in the 19th century by 19th century grandmothers in Scotland. An article written by His Holiness Dalai Lama is probably not going to be about making money on the stock market. Right. Okay, so now you come to read the text slowly and carefully. Take your time. So you've read it once, yeah? You've skimmed it once, and then you go back and you read it again. And this time you're reading it really closely and carefully. Take your time with the text. Don't rush it. It's not a race. Some texts you can understand quite quickly and others will take more time. The terser the language, the longer you should take to read it. Stop regularly, stare out the window, and let your mind turn slowly over the arguments. So we've done the fast one. Now we go back and we do it very slowly. And we take breaks. And we read, you know, we read a paragraph and then we think, is that true? What's his reasons for that? That's an interesting point that he makes. I wonder how that would apply to the context of blah, 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 blah. Yeah? Okay, great. So my suggestion would be you're better off reading less and reading it carefully and slowly and thinking about it than reading everything very fast. So if you have been given a reader like this and you're like, this is my first time I've done this, I'm completely overwhelmed, my suggestion would be to discriminate what are the most important texts, what, you know, maybe what you have to write your essay on or something like this, and to really spend your time reading and rereading and getting a good grasp on less material than trying to do it all. Because when you try and do it all, you end up coming to the end and being like, I have no idea what was going on. So at the beginning, I would definitely recommend reading less and reading slowly. So then step 6, identify the main point of each paragraph. So this, I mean, this takes a lot of time, right? If you've got, you know, a text of 40 pages, then you've maybe got 100 paragraphs. That's quite a lot. If you can summarize each paragraph just into one sentence or one point, then that's really great. It means that you can then look back at the notes you've made and you can see the whole flow of the argument in a very concise way. This is excellent, yeah? Okay, and I've got information about how to do that in the section about note-taking. Are we on board so far? Great. Okay, I mean, we've almost finished, so let's push on, at least for this section. Clarify your understanding. So keep your dictionary next to you or on your computer. If there's something that you don't know, if there's a word you don't know, look it up. Don't just assume, oh, it's probably not important. And I mean, this takes a lot of time and it's really, really annoying, especially if you're like me and you have to look up words again and again and again and again, like, you know, lots of times. But I would definitely recommend, if there is a word you don't know, look it up. If there is an idea you don't know, Google it. Wikipedia. Wikipedia is not good as like a source to put in your essays. It's not good to say, you know, I got my information from Wikipedia. It's not like a kind of legitimate sort of valid source reference for your essays, but it's really, really good to find out information, to find out general information for your own benefit, yeah? Okay. So look the things up. RigPerWiki is also really good. I don't know if you guys have come across that. That's quite useful. RigPerWiki, you know? Maybe. Okay, so RigPerWiki is just like a Buddhist version of, it's a Buddhist Wikipedia, basically. So it's got more detail than a lot of the wiki articles. Okay, try to make sense of the meaning of tricky concepts from the way they're used in other texts. Write down any words you're unsure about. Okay, great. You can also, if there's a concept you don't understand, if there's a sentence you don't understand, write it down, ask your teacher. If you ask your teacher, they will be so delighted because they will know that you've read the text and they will know that you have enough interest in the text to want to understand the meaning. So this is a really useful, not just a way of learning, but it's also very useful for impressing your teacher, which, you know, I don't know, you probably don't want to do that, but you guys are probably not like me in that sense. Okay, we also said learn from the language and the author's techniques. Notice elegantly worded phrases, poetically written sentences to better learn academic styles of writing. Okay, great. Okay, and then think about what is interesting to you. What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? Are there any particularly interesting points that the author makes? Are there any ideas that are completely new to you or that you find surprising? And this is like the beginning of your analysis part. So far, what we found out is the meaning of the text, yeah? Now we want to go into the analysis. And the first part of the analysis is what is the author's thesis and what are her arguments to support her thesis. That's really, really important. Unfortunately, we didn't really leave much time, which is very, very unfortunate. I don't know. Is this useful, or is this stuff that you already know, or am I giving you too much information? It's okay. I'm not throwing everything at you, and then if I'm giving you too much, please, please, please tell me, because then I can pull back and I can simplify.
I think it's very useful.
Okay. And you can be honest, yeah. Please, please, also be honest. This is not like a for credit class that, you know, I'm not going to mark you on anything, so you can say, you know, whatever. Okay, so maybe, do you guys have any? Oh no, this class goes till 3 o'clock. Okay, we're fine. We're laughing. Are there any questions so far? Okay, great. So, it's step 2. That was step 1. Step 1 is finished. Step 2, active reading, identifying the arguments. Okay, so now you've already read, you've skimmed the text once, you've read it closely a second time, and like got the main points from each of the paragraphs. Now I'm going to get you to go back and read it a third time. And again, this is once your reading becomes once your reading becomes more sort of natural, you won't necessarily need to read, to do it like this, yeah. But this is just a suggestion for the first time before these ideas become internalized. It'll get to the point where you'll automatically be looking for the thesis. You'll automatically, you won't have to sort of go through these things step by step. You'll automatically just kind of have this idea. Oh well, it was written by, Shantideva, therefore it's probably going to be a practice-based test, and I mean it's going to become very intuitive, yeah. But this is just basically I'm belaboring each step and making everything really kind of separate and distinguished, because we don't know where to start at the beginning. Okay, right. So identifying the arguments. Read the text again, and this time look for the author's thesis. What are we looking for? Anybody? Come on, guys, come on. Somebody give me what I want.
The thesis?
The author's thesis. Thank you very much. And how he supports his thesis or her thesis with his or her arguments. I don't know why I used the male pronoun there. Before you can critically analyze the text or have an opinion about whether you agree with the author's arguments or not, you have to know what the arguments are. So we have to learn to draw out what the thesis is. Okay, great. So, as for that, step 10. Okay, where to find the claims. So the way I've explained this is that you have the thesis, which is like the hand, and then you have the author's claims, which are like the sub-arguments, right? So it's got, for example, in my hand, I have one main thesis, and that unifies all the sub-arguments. And everyone, there's no finger which is disconnected and which is over here, thank goodness, because then I couldn't type. Every finger is connected to the main argument. It should be. Sometimes authors are a bit, not great, but ideally, they are making a thesis, and these are the claims, the arguments or the claims, right? Sometimes it's really hard to work out, like, I don't know, some author will be talking about like something really, really weird, and then it takes a really long time to work out why is he telling me this? Why does he want to go into so much detail about, the hairstyles of, 16th century monastics? Like, I mean, why is he going into this in so much detail? What has this got to do with, with 20th century, Buddhist social movements? Like, what's the connection there? But if you really think about it, eventually you can try and at least, sometimes they're explicit. Sometimes they'll be, you know, monks in 50s, I'm just making this all up, yeah, this is completely rubbish, but anyway, monks in 15th century Sri Lanka didn't shave their heads, and that's connected to my thesis that, you know, the 20th century engaged Buddhist movement is a movement about shaving one's head. I don't know, something like that. That doesn't make any sense. I take that back. That's horrible. I should prepare some kind of like argument so I don't find myself in these horrible positions. Anyway, so where do you find the claims? Where do you find the arguments? Yeah. So remember, one thesis, several claims. Take note of the first and last sentence of each paragraph. The first sentence, called the topic sentence, will likely be what the paragraph will be about. And the last sentence, the concluding sentence, often gives a summary of the main claim of the paragraph. These are good places to find the author's claim. Good places to find the author's claims. We will learn more about the structure of paragraphs when we come to writing our own paragraphs. Okay. So for each so before you've gone through and you've said like what the main point of each paragraph is, maybe just like a word or something which you know which the paragraph is about. But here you want to rephrase that as the author's claim. So the first time I went through and I was like, okay, this sentence is about the hairstyles of 15th century monks in Sri Lanka. And now when I'm doing it, I want to think about what is the claim that the author is making about 15th century monks in Sri Lanka, and that is that they didn't have shaved heads. Right. So you identify the claims and then you identify the author's thesis, and they're separate things, yeah? Okay, so the thesis is the author's main argument. This is also what should unify the whole text into a coherent whole. Think of it as the spinal cord of the text. So the thesis should connect everything together. There should not be anything in that article that doesn't directly or indirectly point towards the thesis, support the thesis, yeah? Sometimes contradict the thesis, yeah? Sometimes the author will introduce a counter idea, a counter example, or a counter argument, so that they can then refute that counter argument. But it will always be connected somehow to the thesis, right? In some cases, so this is the trick, right? I make these general claims, okay, there's always a thesis, except for when there's not, which is annoying. In some cases, there may not be a thesis. For example, in textbooks, often the purpose of the author is to explain about a historical era or a philosophical concept rather than make an argument. In such cases, this step does not apply. Remember, if it is a textbook, it may have been assigned just to give you some general background information on the subject area. If it is an article or a book chapter, chances are there will be a thesis in there somewhere. Yeah? Okay. So how do you know what is a thesis? So often when people are writing their own, or when they're trying to identify the thesis of an author, they will say, I'll say, what is a thesis? And they'll say, well, the article is about 15th century practices of Mahamudra. And this is a topic, yeah? That's the topic. The topic is 15th century practices of Mahamudra. That is not a thesis. I'm going to say it again. That is not a thesis. What is it not? It's not a
thesis.
It's not argument.
Right, it's not a thesis. Okay. Why is it not a thesis? Because it is not making a claim. So the thesis will be something that is to be proven by the rest of the article. You cannot prove 15th century, what did I say? 15th century practices of Mahamudra. You can't prove or disprove that, right? That's a subject about which to make claims. If I said, however, 15th century practices of Mahamudra were of non-Buddhist origin, that's a claim. That could be a thesis, right? So a thesis is something which could be true or false. Sometimes it is overt. Sometimes it's very clear. Sometimes the author will be very kind and he'll say, my thesis is that, and you're like, oh, thank you so much. Oh, that's wonderful. You're the best ever. Sometimes, most likely, they won't say that. And you'll have to work it out from sort of hints that they give in the introduction and putting together all the arguments and thinking about, well, taken together, what could all these arguments prove? And then you have to kind of, abstract a thesis from what the author said. Okay. So a thesis must be a propositional statement. It must be what's called a propositional statement. A propositional statement is something that could be true or false. Something that could be true or false. If you ask if you add to the beginning of what you think might be a thesis, is it true that then you'll be able to understand whether it's something that could be true or false. For example, does this make sense? It is true that the sky is blue. Yeah, right. So the sky is blue is a propositional statement. It is something that could be true or false. It is therefore a thesis, yeah? Or it could be a thesis, yeah? What if I said Buddhism? Is that something that could be true or false? No. You have to say something about Buddhism, yeah? So Buddhism, not a thesis. If someone asks you the thesis and you say the thesis is Buddhism, that's not a thesis, yeah? What is the cause of suffering? Could that be a thesis? Is it true that what is the cause of suffering? That doesn't make sense. The what is the cause of suffering is a question. The cause of suffering is attachment. That is a propositional statement. That could be a thesis, yeah? Copernicus believed that the world was round. Could that be a thesis? Put your hand up if you think, okay, I'll read it out and you guys put your hands up if you think it could be a thesis. Copernicus believed that the world was round. Doesn't matter if it's true or not, but is it the kind of thing that could be true or false? Yeah, okay. Who thinks, anyone else think it is? Okay, great. You guys are right. If I had chocolates like here, I would be giving you guys chocolates and not the other people, sorry. How people in Italy cook pasta. Put your hand up if you think this is a thesis. Oh, good work. Nobody thinks that's a thesis. Excellent. All that glitters is not gold. All that glitters is not gold. Who thinks it could be a thesis? Great. Excellent. The impossibility of rebirth. Who thinks that? I see you guys. This is too easy, right? Buddhism is similar to Christianity. Buddhism, sorry, Trung. I can see you're like, what? I'm speaking too fast. I'm getting excited. Buddhism is similar to Christianity. Buddhism is similar to Christianity. Okay. Great. Again, good work that that could be a thesis. Now, that's not to say it's true, but it's the kind of thing that could be true or false. Why we should make offerings. Is that the kind of thing that could be a thesis? No. Great. Excellent. Usually the thesis will be something that is a little bit controversial or a modification of some idea which is generally accepted. So if you're reading the text, probably the thesis is not going to be, let's see, what's something really obvious? Buddhism is a world religion. I don't know. I mean, that's something that's kind of really obvious. So why would someone spend their time to try and prove that? It's kind of a little bit boring. Usually it'll be something a little bit more controversial. For example, Buddhism is not a world religion because it is not a religion. That's something a little bit more like, this is exactly, so this is something that could definitely be a thesis, and it's not something that's so obvious that it doesn't need explanation. It's something that's a little bit controversial, right? So you could argue it. You could absolutely argue that, and a lot of people do say, well, actually Buddhism is not religion, it's philosophy. I mean, you've probably heard this before, yeah? So it's the kind of thing you could definitely argue, but it's not so obvious that the reader's like, oh, who cares? Like, this is very, I already know this, yeah? Okay. So it's usually going to be something a little bit controversial, which we can talk about later. Where to find the thesis? There may be a thesis somewhere at the beginning of the text. Look for it in the first page or two. I think we said this, yeah? You might also find it at the end of the text in the conclusion. So each text is usually going to follow the general format of introduction, body, conclusion. Everyone's familiar with that structure? Introduction, body, conclusion. Yeah, great. Okay. It is very unusual to find the thesis hidden in the body of the text, but sometimes it is, because, you know, some of these writers are, you know, they like to make it very difficult for everybody. Sometimes the thesis is not explicitly stated anywhere. In this case, you have to induce, means you have to reason out the thesis from the claims that the author makes. Okay. So, okay, that's it for step 11. Is this so far so good? Yeah, this is a lot of information. I'm giving you a lot of information. But anyway, I'm just going to keep throwing information at you, and what sticks, sticks, and what doesn't stick, that's fine. People will throw it at you again and again and again and again until it sticks, yeah? And also this is quite good, because part of the one of the other skills of doing these BA degrees is learning to feel overwhelmed. You sit in class, you have people just talk at you in these sort of endless streams. You sit in the Kempo classes and you just have like sort of this bombardment of information, especially if it's a subject that you haven't studied before. If you're studying, you know, if you haven't studied Buddhist studies before, or you haven't studied Buddha Dharma before, and you don't know what the difference is between, you know, an arhat and a bodhisattva, and then suddenly you're in this class and they're just assuming that everybody knows these things, and they're throwing these at you, and these are the 4 types of bodhicitta, and this is the 22 types of this, and here are the 7 things, and they divide into 22. But part of the skill, like in the Kempo classes, but also in the philosophy classes, where they're doing the same thing with like these other concepts. They're like, you know, this person's view is that the blah 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 blah, and the, you know, the Madhyamikan's view of the Zittadin is based on this blah, blah, blah. They're giving you so much, right? Part of the trick is not to grasp some things. Don't try and grasp everything. Don't try and get everything, especially not the first time, because you'll get these things again and again and again. But just, you know, especially in the philosophy classes, if you can find something that you find interesting in the class, each class, pick one thing that you find interesting and go think about that. Spend 10 minutes after the class thinking about one idea that was brought up, yeah? And this will give you this kind of practice of reflecting on specific things, yeah? Because especially with the philosophy classes, and by that I mean like the Western style philosophy classes, they don't want you to remember everything. They want you to engage with some things and think about some things and have some opinions about some things, right? Okay, great. So back to the author's thesis, and I keep using the male pronoun, but I thought I switched it up. But anyway, here we go. The author's arguments are her claims and the evidence she uses to support her claims. The arguments are used to support or justify her thesis. Right. Is that clear? Okay. The author will use evidence to support his claims. Evidence might be things like examples, which demonstrate the claim, logical inferences, which prove the truth of the claim, or quotes from authoritative sources, which show that other people accept the claim. Keep in mind that if I want to prove something, an example is not going to completely prove something. A quote from an authoritative source is not going to completely prove something. It might work towards proving something, but it's not going to completely prove it. For example, if I want to prove that Evelyn, I'm going to pick on you. If I want to prove that Evelyn is a human being, I can't say, for example, Evelyn is a human being, for example, like Lily. That's not going to prove, I mean, that's a good example. She is an example of a human being, but that is not going to prove that Evelyn is a human being, right? This is something that in the Buddhist logic, sometimes they use examples as a way of proving, and it doesn't, if I was debating them, I would like pick them up on that, absolutely. The other thing that doesn't count as like a completely like smackdown argument is authority. So just because Gethin says something doesn't mean it's true. And that also works for the Buddhist masters as well. Just because Shantideva says something doesn't mean it's true. I think we mentioned that before, yeah? So if you want to make like a strong, solid argument, and I mean, this is not being like disrespectful. This is also something that the Buddhist logicians would also hold to. They would also say, if you look at the debate culture within the Buddhist context, they would definitely say that an example is not enough to completely prove something. It can demonstrate it, but it can't prove it. They would also say that even this great, holy scripture is not enough to prove something. Mostly, except there's all these really interesting, complicated arguments about how it could be because it's an authority force. But generally speaking, yeah? Okay, great. Okay. Right. So, where were we? Okay, but logical inferences, they're usually pretty sound, yeah? So identify the claims and see how each argument links back to the thesis. I think we've gone over this, yeah? Thesis, arguments, how are they connected? So ask yourself, how does this claim relate to, support the author's main thesis? If it does, it should, it doesn't always, but it should. So I've got some diagrams here. Maybe don't get overwhelmed by the diagrams. Okay, but let me just give you an example. If my thesis is that RIY has a unique approach to Buddhist studies, RYI, I don't even know the name of my own school. RYI has a unique approach to Buddhist studies. And I've given 3 reasons for this. I've given 3 arguments. One is that ROI has a diversity of students from different backgrounds. And then I've given some evidence for that. And the evidence would be maybe giving like a list of which students come from which places. So you've got three things. You've got the main thesis, and then you've got each of the arguments, and then supporting the arguments, you need evidence. Does that make sense? Maybe, maybe not. Okay, don't worry about that. If it doesn't make sense, that's fine. Just remember thesis, arguments. All right, so that's my first one. RIY is very engaged with the living tradition in Nepal. And the evidence that I would give for that, if I was going to give more information, is that many other classes are taught by monks in the traditional style of monastic education. And then the third argument that I would give is that RIY's methodology is to balance insider and outsider perspectives. What do I mean by that? I mean that RIY's style of teaching has a mix between sort of not objective, but sort of Western academic approaches and people who are Buddhist in the tradition, teaching in the traditional way, i.e. the Khenpo teachers. So then if you look below at the arguments, yeah, you've got the thesis, and then you've got three different arguments. And then each argument has a claim and has some pieces of evidence. So that's, I mean, I don't know if this is helpful or if this is just making things more confusing. But from my own perspective, when I'm reading something, it often helps to make a diagram of the author's thesis and then make a diagram of the interrelated arguments, because then you can see it in a picture, like pictorial form, how all the things relate to each other, what proves what. So I am missing, oh, okay, no, okay, this is maybe enough, okay. So that's the first two steps. We haven't got onto the third step. We can try and do that now if you want, or we can maybe try and digest what we've done so far, which would probably be the best view. Basically, the first step is looking at the general facts and the general meaning. The second step is looking at the author's thesis and how it relates to their arguments and how their arguments support their thesis. And then the third step is going to be a critical engagement. But unless you've done the first two steps, unless you know the subject matter, which is the first part, and the thesis and the arguments, which is the second part, unless you've done that, you can't go on and really analyze the text, which is the crux of what you're supposed to do with active reading. Does that make sense? This is really hard, and it's very complicated, and if you're feeling overwhelmed, like don't be ashamed about that, because it's, you know, it's really a matter of throwing you guys into it and you know, just trying to work your way through it. Yes, Lily, you have a question?
Yeah, I think more like the problem when I try to write or something like it's like when I bring out some argument, I analyze like the opposite, like the defense of that argument, and then it's kind of look. For example, in this example, the second reason, like he gave RYI is very engaged with the living tradition in Nepal. Then when I bring up such argument, then in my mind it's going to be like, oh, I have to prove that it is unique. Why it is unique approach? Then I have to prove like normally people are gonna have it's not unique. because generally they have another approach, and then it's come up more and more and more, something like that. It's overwhelming.
Yes, I mean this is part of the problem when you guys are writing your own essays. I mean, you have these ideas, right? And you have your thesis, and then there's like 16 different ideas and sort of branches coming off, and it's really hard. And one of the tasks for your own writing is to really narrow it down, is to not say everything that you want to say. There were maybe like 20 ideas that could prove, that 20 arguments that one could make for our, and also, don't take this this thesis too seriously. This is me sort of being a little bit cheeky to say that, ROI is really, really great is probably not, it's not a great thesis because it's a little bit subjective, and, it wouldn't be the kind of thing you would usually do for a thesis. But just for a little bit of fun, because I know how to have fun, we can say ROI is a unique approach to learning. But then there are so many reasons that you can give. So how do you narrow down those reasons? You just have to pick, for your own essays, I would say no more than 3 arguments, because otherwise it's going to be too long, because you've usually only got, 1,000 or 3,000 words to write it. And stick with maybe two strong arguments or 3 strong arguments. You don't want to have any more than that. But you're right, like as soon as you start reading that, you start thinking, and this is really good, like if you're in that habit of, seeing the thesis and then reading the arguments, and then having your mind sort of develop all these other new arguments and go in lots of different directions, that's really, really useful, because it means that you're thinking, it means that you are actually engaged in active reading, you're doing active reading. So that's excellent. But the difference is between like having all those ideas and thinking about all those ideas, and then when you come to write, you become, the time of having the ideas, at the time of reading, it's like expanding. And then at the time when you come to write, it's like narrowing stuff down. Does that answer your question? I'm not actually sure if I answered your question, because it was a little bit hard to hear you.
I think it's quite useful that you mentioned that you narrow down, and then it's like, because I often feel overwhelmed because everything is just coming up.
Yeah. This is tricky. You're right. There's a lot. It's tricky and it's annoying, and thinking too much is like, it can be very distracting. It's also part of the process of active reading. Yeah. But you're right. It is a balance. If you forget to eat breakfast because your mind is, so busy, engaged in the text, and you've kind of gone off into, there's like, you want to kind of eat and sleep and, do all the other things that human beings have to do. Right. But yeah, but that's good. That's a positive step. It's a really positive thing. Patrick, you had a question?
Yes, I have a question regarding the readings. We have heard that we should read text several times, if possible, as a first-year BA student. I'm not English is not my mother language. I hardly manage to read the text once, sometime. And if I read everything, I need too much time. If I don't read everything, I'm afraid to overlook something important. So how can I manage this?
This is a very, very good question, and this is a question I get asked a lot. My own view is that for these philosophy subjects, and the history subject and the sort of Western academic philosophy subjects, that because part of the practice is learning how to actively engage, that you're better off reading less and reading it thoroughly and actually thinking about it. That's my general suggestion. Now, I understand that is problematic, because then what happens when you get to class and the teacher says, oh, what does such and such an author say? Hey, Patrick, what is the view of da-da-da? And you're like, I didn't read that text. I don't know. so that, I mean, that's the risk, yeah. But generally with these types of subjects, like for example with history, you won't need to know everything. You'll need to know what's useful for your essays. And then you'll have to have a general knowledge which is useful for exams. And most of that general knowledge will come from the classes. So in the class, I presume, yeah, this is how it used to be, and I presume that it's Julia, yeah, that's doing that class. So I presume it's the same for her, right? So she will like talk you through, put your hand up if you're doing history. Okay, is that the 1, 2, 4? Okay, great. Is that the class that you are worried about in terms of the volume of reading, Patrick?
Yeah, it was mostly history, yes.
Okay. So in that class, presumably the teacher will talk you through the main points, that the kind of facts that you need to know. Okay, this is the difference between Mahayana and Yogacara. This is, you know, the first council. This is, I presume that she's talking you through that stuff in the classes, yeah? So that will give you that basis that you need for the exams. Even if you miss something, and I have to be careful because I don't want to like tell you not to do your homework and not to do your readings, but if it's a matter of reading everything at this level or reading 2 texts at a much deeper level, then you're better off reading that text at a much deeper level, because then you have something to discuss in your essay. And then you also have practice in the most important task of critical reflection. Because that learning how to do critical reflection and practicing critical reflection is way more important for this kind of a course, for like a humanities, like BA degree, than knowing, like being able to list off the 18 types of different schools that were present at the first council, or knowing that, you know, the date of that the Buddha's grandson went to Sri Lanka, or knowing the date of, you know, whatever. So knowing the names and the dates, and what's most important is the critical reflection part, being able to read a text, analyze a text, and understand the meaning of the text and have some reflection about that. So I would say that. Now, one idea that you could engage with is if there are other people that you wanted to get in a kind of group with, and if you wanted to sort of each person do one kind of deep reading and then get like a summary from them, like share their summary, yeah? Then that would also be a good way of just making sure that you didn't miss any really important points. That would be my suggestion. But yeah, maybe, I mean, I don't know, maybe don't tell Julia that I said that, because she might be like, why are you telling my students not to do their readings? But this, I mean, ideally you want to read it all, but as a matter of fact, you know, in these kinds of courses, you don't, you know, you have to make choices, yeah? Okay. Great. Calphone, you have a question.
No, Joe, I don't have a question.
Oh, you've still got your hand up from the last question. Okay.
Sorry.
No problem. That's absolutely fine. Does anybody else have any questions? Please tell me if I keep saying this, but it's because I can't see your damn faces. Please tell me if this is useful, or if it's not useful, we can do something else.
To me,
Okay.
it's very useful.
Okay.
Because I have no experience in reading texts like in that manner we discussed, and so everything is new to me, and therefore it's so helpful. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm very glad to hear that. I'm delighted to hear that. But Yeah. Okay. Okay. So in that case, I'm thinking that we've got 2 more of these classes. We do need to cover, obviously, like essay writing, general essay writing techniques. The next part, which is the critical reflection, is really, really important, which is the sort of second half of active reading. So remember we said before, you do the preliminary part where you kind of get an idea of the text, what the text is about. Then you do, another reading where you look at, what do you do in the second one? What's the second part? Lily is saying, but she's on mute. But she knows that.
To find the arguments of the author for the passage.
I can't hear what she said. I'm going
to find the second step is to find the arguments of the author for his passage.
Excellent. Okay. That's the second part, yeah? And then the third part is the critical reflection. And that's the part where you get to engage in your own analysis, where you get to think, is this right? Is this wrong? But not only that, that's one part of it. More importantly, are the reasons sound? Are they good reasons? Because something can be completely wrong, but the reason's excellent. Something could be completely right. No, hang on. What did I say? Something could be wrong, but the reasons are excellent.